Hello, students! Today we are going to understand the events of October 1917, a time when a small political party, the Bolsheviks, took control of Russia. This was a moment that would change not just Russia, but the entire world for the next century. So how did it all happen? Let's find out. First, we'll look at why the government that took over from the Tsar was failing. Then we'll see how a famous leader, Lenin, came back with a new plan. After that, we'll understand how his party, the Bolsheviks, became so popular. We'll then study the uprising itself, how power was finally captured, and what it meant for the future. So, let's begin. Our story starts after the February Revolution, when the Tsar had to give up his throne. A new government was formed, called the Provisional Government. But instead of solving Russia's problems, it actually faced even bigger challenges. Now, this is a very important question to consider. You would think that once the king is gone, things would get better, right? But in Russia, the problems did not go away. In fact, the crisis continued. Let's understand why. You see, the new government made some very big mistakes. First, it decided to keep Russia in the First World War. The soldiers were tired of fighting, and people wanted peace, but the government didn't listen. In the cities, it went against the workers who wanted more say in the factories. For the peasants in the villages, who were the majority of the population, the government delayed giving them land. And on top of all this, there was not enough food in the cities, and people were going hungry. So the government was losing support from everyone. Into this situation of chaos and unhappiness, a very important and influential leader returned to Russia. He had been living outside the country, in exile, but he came back with a very clear and radical plan. That person was Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Party. When he arrived back in Russia in April 1917, he saw that the people were very angry with the provisional government. He understood what they wanted, and he offered them a simple and direct alternative. He presented his plan in what is famously known as the April Theses. Now, the word theses just means his main points or arguments. The real power of his plan was in its simplicity. He gave very simple solutions to the biggest problems that the people were facing. His demands were very clear. First, he said the war must end immediately. This was exactly what the tired soldiers wanted to hear. Second, he demanded that all the land belonging to the rich nobles should be transferred to the peasants. And third, he said all banks should be nationalized, meaning they should be controlled by the state. This message was so popular it was often summarized in 3 simple words: peace, land, and bread. So the Bolsheviks were just a small party at the beginning. How did they use Lenin's simple message to become so influential in just a few months? Let's see how they built their support. Throughout the summer of 1917, as the provisional government continued to make mistakes, more and more people started to believe in the Bolsheviks. They were the only ones who seemed to have a clear plan for what to do. The Bolsheviks were very strategic. They focused on gaining influence in important organizations called the Soviets. Now, a Soviet is a Russian word for council. These were councils made up of workers and soldiers, and these Soviets had real power. They could control railways and army units. By gaining support inside the Petrograd Soviet and others like it, the Bolsheviks were building their power from the inside. As you can see, their support was built step by step. They gained power in Soviets all over Russia. They set up committees and factories to represent the workers. They even formed committees within the army to gain the loyalty of the soldiers. Trade unions also grew in strength. In the countryside, hearing these new ideas, peasants did not even wait for a new law. They just started taking over the land themselves. Slowly, the government was losing control. As the government's power became weaker and weaker, Lenin felt that the time was right. He decided that it was time to stop talking and to take action. This leads us to the main event, the October Uprising. Now, this uprising was not a spontaneous or chaotic event. No, it was a very carefully planned operation. It was organized by Lenin and another important Bolshevik leader, Leon Trotsky. They used their supporters in the army, the Soviets, and the factories to prepare for a coordinated takeover. The entire plan was managed by a special secret group. It was called the Military Revolutionary Committee. It was led by Trotsky, and its one and only job was to organize the seizure of power. And everything happened very quickly, over just 2 days. On the morning of October 24th, the Prime Minister, Kerensky, left the city to find troops who were still loyal to him. The government tried to shut down Bolshevik newspapers, but it was too little, too late. In response, Trotsky's committee ordered their supporters to take control of government buildings, telephone offices, and train stations. By that night, a ship called the Aurora fired a signal shot, and the Bolsheviks attacked the Winter Palace, where the government ministers were. By the next day, it was all over. The city was in Bolshevik hands, and the ministers had surrendered.
So, taking over buildings was one thing. But remember, the Bolsheviks were still just one party among many. So how did they make their takeover seem official and legitimate to the rest of the country?
This is where their timing was perfect. On the very same day that they took power, a big meeting was happening. It was the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, with representatives from all over the country. The Bolsheviks went to this meeting and announced that they had taken power in the name of the Soviets. The majority of the people at the meeting approved their action. This was very important because it gave their revolution the appearance of popular support.
Now let's clear up some common misunderstandings about the revolution. The first myth is that it was a huge, bloody battle. In reality, the takeover in the city of Petrograd happened quite quickly and with very few people getting hurt. The second myth is that the revolution solved all of Russia's problems. This is also not true. In fact, it was just the beginning of many new challenges, including a long and terrible civil war. Let's move to our final section and see how this event started a completely new chapter in Russian and world history. What was the long-term impact? So, to summarize our lesson, these are the most important points you should remember. The provisional government failed because it did not give people what they wanted most: peace, land, and bread. Lenin's April Theses offered a simple and popular plan. The Bolsheviks worked very carefully to build support among all sections of society. The uprising itself was a well-organized plan. And finally, this revolution marked the beginning of the world's first socialist state. And this leaves us with a thought for our next lesson. Gaining power was just the first step. The real challenge of building a new type of society was just about to begin. How would the Bolsheviks rule this huge country? We will explore that next time.